The new Virginia recreational cannabis sales bill will be explained right here today. If you've been following Virginia cannabis policy over the last few years, you already know that progress here tends to move in stages, sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but rarely without intention. Today's update is one of those moments worth pausing on. Because a new bill has just been filed in Virginia that would do two important things at the same time. It would legalize and regulate recreational cannabis sales, and it would increase the legal possession limits for adults under existing state law. Now, this is not speculation. This is not rumor. And it's not a campaign talking point. This is an actual piece of legislation, introduced by a sitting Virginia lawmaker, and it reflects months of structured policy work behind the scenes. Let's walk through what this bill actually does, why it matters, who it affects, and how it fits into Virginia's long-term cannabis framework. Here's the context and where Virginia stands today. So, let's start with the foundation. Virginia legalized adult possession of cannabis back in 2021. Possession, that is. Adults can legally possess limited amounts, and limited home cultivation is allowed under state law. However, and this is the key distinction, Virginia does not currently have a legal recreational retail market. There are no licensed adult use dispensaries. There is no regulated sales system for the general public. And that gap has created confusion, enforcement inconsistencies, and policy pressure from multiple directions. Over the past several years, lawmakers have tried to build a retail framework. Those efforts were passed by the legislature, twice, and vetoed by the outgoing governor. So when we talk about this new bill, we're not talking about a sudden shift. We're talking about a continuation of a process that has already been underway for years. What this new bill does, at a high level. The Virginia Recreational Cannabis Sales Bill explained here has two core components. First, it would legalize and regulate recreational marijuana sales for adults. Second, it would increase the amount of cannabis adults are legally allowed to possess under Virginia's current non-commercial legalization law. That combination matters. Because possession rules and retail systems are not separate policy silos, they're linked. You cannot regulate one effectively without addressing the other. This bill is designed to align those two areas so the law reflects how adults actually interact with the system. Who introduced the bill, and why that matters? The bill was introduced by Delegate Paul Krizek, a Democrat who chairs Virginia's Joint Commission to oversee the transition of the Commonwealth into a cannabis retail market. That title is important. This is not a symbolic role. This commission exists specifically to study, design, and recommend how Virginia should transition into a regulated retail cannabis market. In other words, this bill did not appear in isolation. It is largely aligned with recommendations released by that commission, meaning it reflects structured policy research, stakeholder input, and regulatory planning, not improvisation. Here are some positive policy signals in this bill. Here's where it's important to slow down and acknowledge the positives. This legislation signals that Virginia lawmakers are treating cannabis as a regulated consumer market, not a loophole. Emphasizing product clarity and transparency. Recognizing the need for consistent statewide standards. And that approach is echoed by comments from Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who has publicly stated support for legalizing adult-use marijuana sales. Her comments focused on something regulators care deeply about, labeling and consumer knowledge. She compared cannabis products to alcohol, not to normalize use, but to highlight a regulatory principle. Consumers should know what they're buying, how strong it is, and how it's regulated. That framing matters because it signals governance, not promotion. Hey, before we dive into this next part, I want to take a quick moment to invite you to join the Norfolk City Cannabis Community. If you're following Virginia cannabis law, policy updates, or local regulations, this is the place to stay informed and make sure you're ahead of the curve. We're also launching a newsletter that will deliver the latest legal updates, policy changes, and important insights straight to your inbox. It's completely free, and it's designed to help you stay up to date without having to dig through dozens of sources. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and sign up for the newsletter. You won't miss a single update, and you'll be part of a community that's serious about staying informed. Alright, let's get back to where we left off. So let's look at who this bill affects. Now let's talk about impact, calmly and precisely. This bill affects adult Virginia residents navigating possession limits, local governments preparing for zoning and enforcement questions, state agencies tasked with licensing and compliance, courts and law enforcement interpreting cannabis statutes, policy professionals tracking the evolution of state cannabis law. What it does not do is tell anyone to use cannabis, sell cannabis, or engage in activity outside the law. This is about legal structure, not lifestyle. Why possession limits matter. Possession limits may sound like a technical detail, but they're one of the most important parts of cannabis law. Ambiguous or outdated limits create enforcement disparities. Clear limits reduce legal confusion. And aligned limits make future regulation easier to implement. By addressing possession alongside retail, the Virginia Recreational Cannabis Sales Bill explained here aims to tighten the legal framework, not loosen it. That's an important distinction. Here's some political reality, without drama. Now, let's acknowledge reality, calmly. Virginia has attempted to move forward on retail cannabis before. Those efforts were blocked by gubernatorial veto. That history matters, but it does not invalidate this bill. Instead, it explains why lawmakers are continuing to refine policy language, regulatory safeguards, and implementation plans. The presence of a governor-elect who has expressed support for regulated sales changes the political environment, but it does not guarantee passage. This is still a legislative process. Here a scenario and how this plays out locally. Let's pause and consider a realistic scenario. Imagine a Virginia city preparing zoning ordinances in anticipation of a regulated market. Clear state law allows them to plan responsibly, instead of reacting after the fact. That's what structured legislation enables. It gives local governments time, clarity, and legal footing. Why this matters going forward. The Virginia Recreational Cannabis Sales Bill explained today is not the end of the story. But it is a clear signal. It shows that Virginia is continuing to move toward a regulated, transparent cannabis market, one grounded in policy, not hype. And as this bill moves through the legislative process, understanding the legal framework will matter more than headlines. Here's the question I want to leave you with. Do you think Virginia should finalize a regulated retail market now that possession has already been legalized, or should the state continue delaying implementation? Put your answer in the comments. If you found this breakdown useful, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more Virginia cannabis law updates, and visit the Norfolk City Cannabis Community for deeper legal discussion and analysis.